In this section, we're going to be looking at the ways green coatings encasement is used to protect people, buildings, and the environment. Since all green coatings are not alike, as previously discussed, I'll be writing about specific, superior green coatings that are sustainable, renewable, and approved for waterproofing, roofing, and in-place management of hazardous materials such as asbestos, lead-based paint, PCBs, and other solid hazardous materials. Most importantly, how these same green coatings can be used to defend structures, including turning environmentally distressed properties green while stopping toxic exposure to people and the environment, including after disasters. Let's look at these green coatings being your first line of defense from the attack of elements outside your buildings, much like our skin is the first line of defense for our body. Many interior building problems are caused by the unwanted infiltration of natural elements, contaminants, and pests, which can be uncomfortable at best and cause disease and illness at worst. Most of these challenges can be simply stopped and prevented with the right defensive coatings. By sealing the exterior surfaces with a continuous, seamless membrane, making it watertight, resistant to bad weather and ultraviolet rays, therefore creating a better inside building environment. High-quality green coatings encasement creates an impact, abuse, and chemically resistant membrane that is also Class A fire rating, helping to shield a building and not supporting combustion. As more and more external elements damage our property, we need to take defensive action in every possible way to protect our buildings and structures. Green coatings encasement is a defensive building protection, which is needed especially before natural disasters strike. Green coatings encasement can give most building surfaces the best protection against the barrage of high wind and storm events such as typhoons, hurricanes, hail, and sandstorms. But not all threats are caused by natural elements. Some building components are hazardous to your health, including the roof. Sick building syndrome, SBS, is a broad term used to describe industrial, commercial, and residential buildings that have environmental hazards that can lead to BRI, building-related illness. BRI is sometimes caused by exposure to hazardous materials such as asbestos, lead-based paint, and PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, along with products that have high VOCs. Through green coatings encasement, hazardous material can be quickly secured, instantly eliminating the source of exposure. This leaves the potentially harmful material in place doing what it was intended to do, such as with asbestos, some of the best fireproofing known to mankind. The use of green coatings encasement also protects the environment through energy efficiency, turning surfaces solar reflective, saving energy, and not pulling down heat are two substantial ways to protect the environment. Two of the largest man-made surfaces that pull down vast amounts of unwanted heat are roadways and roofs. All roofs can be quickly and easily turned solar reflective. By doing so, you reflect the heat back up and away from your building, keeping your building cooler that requires less energy to cool it down, while contributing to an occupant's overall well-being. This is especially important in different warmer geographical climates and countries. Proven studies have shown that even dropping the temperature a few degrees on the inside of a building can increase people's well-being and even save lives. Restoring old building surfaces with green coating encasement helps to minimize and stop the generation, transportation, and storage of preventable unwanted waste. This is an important issue due to the large amount of negative CO2 emissions coming from decomposing waste in what are sometimes overflowing landfills. These CO2 emissions are contributing to global warming climate change. So anytime we can stop creating this unwanted waste is a positive step in the right direction to protecting the environment. Green coatings encasement can extend the life of obsolete buildings and their components while protecting interior and exterior building surfaces, thereby also extending their useful service life. These coatings are also designed and engineered to cross-link bond, adhere with each other, and are easily renewed when their service life needs to be extended. One building surface that can generate large amounts of waste is roofing. and studies point out that all construction waste generated, 20% of that is from roofing. In many situations, these old roofs can easily be restored with green coatings and casement and not needing removal and replacement. Also not generating unwanted and harmful waste. In many cases, rejuvenation transforms these roofs into better than the original. Asphalt build-up roofs, composition shingles, and other roofing breaks down as they age and release harmful polluting particulates. Studies show that these tiny fragments are entering the environment and causing soil and groundwater and standing water contamination. This can be instantly stopped with the application of green coating encasement, immediately halting and preventing the release of harmful particulate pollution. Another important aspect of protecting people is stopping the release of toxic material that after a natural disaster, where there is a potential of a secondary exposure caused and left behind by the disaster. Let's look at that potential exposure. Floodwaters, hurricanes, earthquakes, tropical storms, rising rivers, tsunamis, typhoons, tornadoes, and wildfires can all leave toxic material behind that can be harmful when they become airborne. Exposure from residential contamination and the inhalation of solid contaminants after disasters can be stopped, contained, and controlled with green coating encasement. Very often, there are many hazardous materials used in buildings, such as asbestos, lead-based paint, heavy metals, etc. They have been useful and not a problem when intact and properly maintained, but when disaster strikes, they are unavoidably released into the environment, adding to the unfortunate consequences of a disaster. Category 3 floodwaters, known as black water, include grossly contaminated substances such as raw sewage, heavy metals, asbestos, PCBs, pesticides, diesel fuel, toxinogenic, pathogenic, and other toxic harmful debris. After floodwaters recede, residual complex toxic material can be left on the surfaces when dry, can be re-released into the environment, becoming airborne and easily inhaled. Other disasters that don't include water damage, such as tornadoes, earthquakes, and wildfires, can also release all kinds of dangerous toxins. These harmful toxins are initially kicked up during the disaster, and then they settle down after landing and can be released during cleanup, causing harmful secondary exposures. Wildfires leave neighborhoods covered in debris and ash. This toxic debris and hazardous ash can contain potentially harmful levels of heavy metals, which include antimony, chromium, arsenic, cadmium, copper, lead, and zinc. This assortment of hazardous debris can also contain electronic waste from computers, monitors, batteries, and other toxic substances from paints, polychlorinated biphenyls, and asbestos. Both water and non-water disasters are similar in that hazardous toxins can be released during those events and then left behind to expose people, especially during the cleanup. The solutions are similar in that all these hazards can be controlled, contained, and avoided in much the same way with green coatings encasement, both before and during the cleanup. Injuries and illnesses associated with secondary exposure from release of toxic residual debris can be reduced and avoided through proper cleanup and containment practices. The first step in any cleanup operation is to evaluate the situation, contain and remove the waste, and then seal down the residual surface contaminants. This includes concentrations of toxic debris from a mixed bag of products. The standard process during cleanup is wetting the debris with water. This minimizes inhalation and release of toxic dust that can become airborne and cause secondary exposure. However, this process of wetting with straight water is good only until the water evaporates and the material dries out again. A better way to handle this situation is by wetting that same harmful material with global encasement. This proven method of dust and solid hazardous material control with green coatings encasement is designed to minimize the potential impact to people and the community. Whether you are removing solid hazardous materials or locking down residual contamination, the use of green coatings encasement can be beneficial and necessary for the cleanup process. Exposure to disaster debris and their side effects are becoming so common that individual types of exposure and health effects they cause are warranting their own names. Tornado cough is one of them. This is the adverse reaction to inhaled particles that irritate the lungs, resulting in coughing that can affect even the healthiest people. Once the immediate disaster from a disaster, such as a tornado or twister, has passed, it can leave behind an invisible hazard that could be just as deadly as the initial threat. Typical things that were initially in buildings and safe to be around are turned into hazardous dust and debris, which can contain heavy metals such as antimony, chromium, arsenic, cadmium, copper, lead, and zinc. Electronic waste from computers, monitors, batteries, and other toxic substances from paints, PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, and asbestos. This type of air pollution is especially harmful because very small particles floating in the air can be inhaled and enter deep within the lungs, traveling to other organs. Although it can impact individuals differently, it can have an immediate and a cumulative negative effect. Wherever it takes place, it can be deadly in the long term. Research confirms that when absorbed, this deadly cocktail of small particles cause heightened rates of lung disease, cancer, and other medical conditions. Of course, tornado cough and other adverse medical conditions are not only the result from exposure to debris left from tornadoes, it can also come from other disasters such as wildfires, earthquakes, hurricanes, typhoons, tropical storms, rising rivers, tsunamis, bombings, and terrorist attacks. One of the largest sites of exposure in the world that I was personally brought in to consult on was in northern Japan after an earthquake struck, triggering a disastrous tsunami. Following the monstrous tsunami wave that struck and receded, it left behind massive quantities of contaminated debris that needed to be dealt with. That powerful wave also smashed into the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, causing a meltdown and massive release of radioactivity. That radioactive release added to all the contamination that was left behind after the destructive floodwaters receded and further complicated the massive cleanup. Green coatings encasement was used to help lock down and control the mountains of debris before and during the cleanup. This was a critical step in helping prevent further exposure to people and the environment. So to recap, there are many ways that green coatings encasement benefits people, buildings, and the environment. Everything from strengthening the outside of a building and structures to defending against strong weather events and other disasters, to turning surfaces solar reflective, to preventing exposure to toxic materials, to helping to minimize the generation of harmful waste. As we continue in future segments, I'll be touching on all these topics and pointing to real-life scenarios where green coatings encasement has been proven to be beneficial.